I would like to introduce Mr. Cornell Wright. He is the Executive Director of the State Office of Minority Health and Health Disparities, and he's here this morning to talk to us about health disparities. So please welcome Mr. Wright.
Good morning. Good morning. We're here to talk about health equity and the differences between health equity, health disparities, health inequities. Raise your hand if you already know all this stuff, then we can excuse you to the next session. My office is in Raleigh. I live in Durham, North Carolina, so it's actually surprising. I didn't hit any traffic, and hopefully don't hit any on the way back. So I actually got to Charlotte in like less than 2 hours, which is unheard of, and I wasn't even speeding. But there was just nobody on the road, so good stuff for that. So our office started because of something larger that happened. And so in 1985, the federal government released a report called the Heckler Report. The Secretary of Health and Human Services for the federal government, Dr. Heckler, released this report that kind of looked at the plight of African Americans and people of color in the country and the health outcomes and how we were faring, and it wasn't a favorable report. And so a year later, it led to the National Office of Minority Health being established. And in North Carolina, in 1987, the State Center for Health Statistics did a report for North Carolina, look at some of the same variables for our population, and the report was very similar. And so 1992, legislation was enacted that started the North Carolina Office of Minority Health, as well as the Minority Health Advisory Council, which is a 15-member body that is appointed by 5 members by the governor, 5 members by the Speaker of the House, and 5 members appointed by the President Pro Tem of the Senate. And so what that body does is work with our office to help the governor, the legislature, and the people of North Carolina understand the issues around minority health and advise on those issues. So 2001, we changed our name to the North Carolina Office of Minority Health and Health Disparities. And in 2017, we will be turning 25, and we're looking at another name change. We're looking at changing our name. We're just gonna drop disparities and put equity. And I'll tell you why in a second. This just tells you about our mission and our vision. Everybody can see everything? Okay, good. And then this kind of breaks down how we are, how we fit in the state level. So we're a part of the department, North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, and within the Division of Public Health. And then when you look at this slide, it shows you on the national level, kind of how we fit in with the National Office of Minority Health. What you don't see is what we'll include at some point. It'd be on the side. There's a state office of minority health in every state in the country, and also in some of the U.S. territories. So about 13 to 15 U.S. territories have a state office of minority health. So someplace like Guam or Puerto Rico, they have a state office of minority health. Also, what you will see are some of the programs that we have in our office. We recently, December of last year, started a Health Equity Lunch and Learn series. And so this is a series that helps people understand health equities in different topic levels. So we started with a guest speaker, Dr. Damon Tweedy, who wrote the book Black Man in a White Coat, and he kind of talks about the issues of disparities and inequities from the standpoint of a physician, an African-American physician. So if you've never heard of that book, I would suggest that you check it out. It's a New York Times bestseller, and he works at the VA and at Duke in the Triangle area. So he's local, but he's global as well. And then some of the other programs we have a program that deals with class, and that's what dealing with the national class standards. That's the cultural and linguistically appropriate services. And so we have someone in our office, Ms. Lucretia Hoffman, who will go out to health departments and help them understand how to be more culturally and linguistically appropriate in the services that you all provide, and it also helps with health departments with their accreditation. And so, but we also work with other health agencies to think about these things as well. We have our Community Health Ambassadors program, which is kind of tied into what we're doing at the state level in terms of community health workers. This program started out just as a diabetes program, helping lay leaders be connected to health systems and health resources, and putting that back in their communities. So now, fast forward, this is not just a diabetes program component, but it's something that we can attach to all health focuses as we move forward. And then we have the Minority Health Advisory Council that we talked about. So, health equity, what is it? I like to talk about it in a way that's even more plain than what we have up here. We talk about, raise your hand if you have ever run track. Keep your hands up. Track, like track and field. Yes, I know I don't look like I run track because I never run track. Now, let's put your hands down. Now, raise your hand if you've ever watched somebody run track. Ah, there we go. Good, good, good. So when we think about health equity, when we think about health disparities, we think about health inequities, let's think about a track, right? So if you're going around the track at least one time, my people who run track have run track. Raise your hand again. Okay. So, and my people that watch track. Okay, good. So when you're trying to get that good position, what is the best position to take if you're running around the track at least once? Oh, there we go. Inside position. There we go. So when we describe all of this, we're talking about this image of track. And there are people who have favorable position, right? So they have that inside position. And so then there are people who have, so what's the opposite of that? So what's the outside is the bad position, right? So you also have people who are not in the inside lane, but are in the outside lane. But they start further back than the people that are in the inside lane. So we also have to look at, there are also hurdles or barriers that people have to jump through when they're in that outside lane. This is what we call the inequities, right? So some of those inequities are these barriers that may be unfair. There's a disadvantage for one group that may not be seen in another group, right? So you have the track, the race starts, you have people in the inside lane that have favorable position that are starting before everybody else, and then you have people on the outside lanes that are starting later who have to jump through these hurdles, these obstacles, these inequities of health that are also historic in nature at times, right? So then that tells us that that's the inequity, right? So then the next thing we have to talk about is the disparity. So the disparity is that measure between one group that started early, that has favorable position, and the other groups who start late that don't have that favorable position. That gap, that distance, that measure, that is the disparity. Everybody got me? We're good? That makes sense, or do I need to keep going? Okay, good. So what is the group that we tend to measure that one group to other groups? Say it. White people, Caucasians, however you want to call them. They are the measure. Come on, wake up now. It's okay. We can call people white and black and brown, and it's okay. It's not a bad thing. So we measure people in that distance, right? We say African Americans are 2 times more likely to have this issue than white people. That's the disparity. So don't get it confused that the inequity or equity are the same thing as a disparity. There's a difference. They're connected, but the disparity is just measure. It's a measurement. So how do we end disparities, right? That's the question for y'all. How do we end disparities? Okay. So to end the disparity is to what? Close the gap, right? So when you think about the language of health equity, we have to be careful because if we're just trying to close the gap, let's pick diabetes, right? Anybody in here work on diabetes? Okay. So if we gave more white people diabetes, wouldn't that close the gap? Am I off? I mean, if we're just talking about, so because we hear language that says we want to eliminate disparities, right? But we have to go further than that. We need to eliminate disparities and promote health equity strategies. So health equity, I forgot to tell this, I don't know why they didn't say this first. When we're talking about the track, health equity is that goal. So when we finish a race, and we get to that goal, when we run through the ticker tape and say, yay, we're done, we did it, that's where we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to health equity. But just by eliminating disparities alone, we are not doing everything that we need to do. Because like I just said, we can give more white people diabetes and we'd be on the same level playing field. And we have closed the gap. So what we want to do is eliminate health disparities while promoting health equity strategies, right? So, have you ever seen this picture? Of course. Usually the first two pictures you've seen, the third picture is a little different. But when we're talking about equality and equity, sometimes people try to use the same language for two different things. So, raise your hand if you want $50. Y'all want it? Well, I ain't got it. Now raise your hand if you need $50. So what, payday was last week? Gotcha. Usually you see less hands go up when you need $50. So when we're talking about the lens, so when we're talking about these things, we got to think about the lens in which we see them. When we're talking about equality, everybody in this room gets $50, right? But when we're talking about equity, we're talking about the demonstrated need for really needing $50 and giving it to those people and meeting people where they are, meeting the community where they are. That's when we're talking about equity. So there's a difference between equality and equity. Sometimes we have to get to equity before we even think about getting to equality. So this is something that we need to think about. So, but no, I don't have $50 to give everybody because I got paid last week too. So all my bills are paid as well. But when looking at these three pictures, so the first one shows equality, the second one shows equity. The third picture is something in itself, something beautiful. It's almost like the health equity piece. It's the goal we want to get to, where we don't have to provide, we get to a point where we don't have to provide resources to everybody and that everybody is on an equal level, equitable playing field. And if you could see there's something missing. What's missing in the third picture? The fence, which is considered a barrier. But what else is put up? A net, so it's like a safety net. So there is some information, I think we're gonna send the slides out, but when you get them, like right under here, I don't know if y'all can see that, it says Advancing Equity Inclusion. When you click on that, you'll see a 100 and something page document that will break all this down. And I have a bunch of goodies that will be in the presentation that are hyperlinked. And so if they don't work, let me know and I'll get you links that will work. But they all should work because I checked them before I left. Okay, so when we're talking about all of these things, we also have to include the social determinants of health. And I like to say social determinants of health and life because they're, to me, connected. And so we have always talked about social determinants of health. Whether you think about it or not, this goes back further than whoever coined the phrase social determinants of health. This is something that Dr. John Hatch and others, Dr. John Hatch is one of the, well, he's my mentor, but he also is one of the people that helped found the, one of the first community health centers in the country. And so they've been talking about this for years, way probably before I was born. And so social determinants of health and life are connected to health because these are the factors that influence our health that sometimes we think about and sometimes we don't think about. So before we even go there, when you think about social determinants, what other things do you think about? So of course we think about housing, education, unemployment. What else is missing though? What else is a social determinant? Family, income, transportation. So let's change our thinking. What about violence? Gender. So we got to think outside of the box. Even with our understanding of social determinants, we need to think even further outside of the box. But what are those other things that influence health outcomes that we don't really think about at the forefront? Culture, huge. So let's look at North Carolina's population, right? So North Carolina's population is changing, is shifting. If you look either behind me or on the sides, you'll see that the 18 to 64 population differs slightly from the under 18 population. What are you seeing? What differences do you see? Okay, we're getting older. Who's getting older? White people, yeah. But not only just getting older, what else is happening to white people? They're getting smaller, right? Because if you look at the under 18, these are people that are coming up behind us now, right? Raise your hand if you remember being 18. I'm not going to ask you how old you are now, but I don't think there's any 18-year-olds in here, right? Oh, did you just raise your hand? Oh. We can feel 18. Yeah, okay, I'll give you that. Okay. Well, I'm 37, and when I turned 30, the next day, everything started hurting. So hopefully I can reverse that when I get to 40 in a few years. But so the white population is declining as you see this shift, right? What does that tell us? It tells us that by 2040, 2050, if this trend keeps going, then we're going to have the dominant population, the dominant culture, the dominant group is getting smaller and will become a minority to the minority groups that we see now. Because you also see that there's an uptick of African Americans, and when you in comparison to the 18 to 64 to under 18 population, it goes up in the under 18, so there's a 2% increase in African Americans. But where do we see the biggest increase? Yeah, there's a huge increase. They go from like 8 or 7% to like 15%. I'm telling you, I can't see any of this, so I'm just kind of, yeah, it's behind me, but I don't want to be, since they're filming, I don't want to be that guy that's like, so you'll know. But so that lets you know I really do this stuff. Another thing that we need to look at is education. So these are also connected back to the social determinants of health. When I was growing up, we were taught to get the high school diploma, and then that can guarantee you the ability to have access to opportunities to find employment. Now it's that we have to look at in 2018, what year is this? So by 2018, 63% of all jobs will require a post-secondary education, at least, right? And we saw this 2008, 2007, in a sense, when the economy took a hit and people who had grant funds were losing grant funds because people who didn't really rely on grant funds then started going to grant funds. Or we could talk about jobs. People who had like PhDs were taking master level people's jobs. People with masters were taking bachelor level people's jobs, and people with bachelors were taking below, right? So it was a waterfall down effect, not a trickle down, but a waterfall. So we have to be mindful of the opportunities and how this connects back to finding employment, right? Poverty. 1 in 5 North Carolinians are in poverty. And then when you break it down by race and ethnicity, you can see some differences. But you break it down by gender. If you're a female head of household, you're almost 50% more likely to be in poverty as opposed to a male head of household who's about like 30%. But if you're married with children, then it goes down even more significantly. And so I always use this point of the presentation to talk about why I love my wife so much and how, being married to her has put me into another bracket of lifestyle because she makes more than me and she's a scientist. So I've grown accustomed to some things in life, and I said, I don't want to go back. My wife is very beautiful, very nice, and I don't know how I survived without her. I'll put it like that. Yeah, we'll be celebrating 10 years of marriage in January, and this fall we have known each other for 20 years. So we dated in high school, then she broke up with me, and then she got back to her senses and picked me. Somebody always says, oh, you were smart to marry her. I said, no, she was smart to marry me. But no, all seriously, when you have somebody that can help you, it's a different conversation. I mean, I don't know how many of y'all are married or not married, but when it's time to pay bills, it's a different conversation. I mean, it's like, okay, we can split this down the middle or however you do your bills. And so if I had to do it all on my own, I wouldn't be here today. So just keep that in mind. Then when we're looking at unemployment rates, so I always use last year's rates because, we're still within this year, so things are fluctuating. But last year we averaged out about 5.5% of unemployment, which on the surface doesn't seem too bad. But when you break it down by race and ethnicity, that turns into 3.9% for white people, 6.9% for Hispanic Latinos, and 9.6% for African Americans. Right, it's crazy, right? When you break it down by county, those numbers go even higher for the minority populations a lot of times. You can get it to 12 to 13, 15% for African Americans in some cases. So these are the things that actually influence our health and well-being. So we go through life with this assumption that, as a health professional, everybody has a primary care physician, right? Everybody has access somewhat to care, but it's not true. And these are some of the factors that influence it. If you don't have a good job, or if you don't have a job, then how do you go to get your health care? And then the factors that kind of pile on is you got family or access to different barriers that happen. It helps influence our health. And you see, these are some of the things that are connected to that piece as well. Policy. Oh, so now I got to do it. Policy and community and organization. Policy, when we think about policy, a lot of times we only think about higher level policies like mandates, rules, regulations, and laws, right? But we're thinking about, even on a lower level, how many of you all, and you can raise your hand, belong to some organization outside of here? Church or fraternities, sororities, civic organizations, community service organizations, or a lodge or something. But those things are governed by policy, right? You have bylaws, you have, constitutions and all these things that are connected for just that organization. How many of y'all have a house or an apartment or a family? Go to family reunions, right? Those things have an order to them. You just can't go and just do whatever you want. Well, you could, but I wouldn't suggest it. But you have things that govern what you do. Even here at work, there are policies, rules, regulations that we govern ourselves to. So, bless you. If you were able to, okay, so do not raise your hand on this. If you were able to drink alcohol at work, and I know none of us do that. Check those people that got the flask. It's not water in that flask. If you were able to smoke weed at work, I mean, if that was a policy that, are you raising your hand? I like him. But if you were able to do this at work, it would change the whole dynamics of what you do, right? That could be positive or negative, right? So I have this, okay, so I have to give you one silly moment. I have this saying that I've been saying for years. I said the only time it's okay to be negative is at the clinic. But back to policy. If you were able to drink or smoke or do whatever, wear whatever at work, it would change the production level, it would change the dynamics it would change the work culture in some sense. So we have things that are restrictive in nature that kind of helps guide the way we do things. Same thing with what we do outside of here, your homes, your organizations. And so we have to start looking at policy in a different level, in a different lens. So when I was in college, I went to North Carolina Central University. Hey, see you at homecoming next week. That's what kicked off my health career. So the public administration department and the public health education department merged together to do a joint project to get the dormitories on the campus 100% tobacco free, right? So we did a class together, and then we started doing different things to educate people. We were doing key informant interviews, we were doing observations, we were doing all these things, surveys, and all of that to get us to a point where we had support to take it to the Board of Trustees. And so we went to the Board of Trustees. We started a student coalition against tobacco use, went to the Board of Trustees and had a presentation all lined up. And yeah, didn't go as planned because the chairman of the board interrupted me in the middle of my presentation and started asking all these hard questions. And we started going back and forth with dialogue and discussion. It was almost like a yelling match. But if you understand culture, you understand that we can get loud with each other and not be angry with each other. So we were having a conversation, but the professor who was in charge of this was not African American. So he's in the background just freaking out like, oh no! And now he had drilled us. I'm not gonna use the word haze because that's illegal in North Carolina. But he drilled us to the point where we knew the information. And so, because we were just gonna we're students. We're just gonna be invincible students and walk in and just do whatever we want and say, oh, we got this. He was like, no, you're gonna practice. So, we started talking, having this exchange, and it from the outside, it just looked bad. It's just like, oh, this is just gonna fail. Then he goes, okay, we're good. We're gonna vote. And we're just looking like, what? And so all in favor, all of them raised their hands, it passed unanimously, and then we were done. So then the professor, whose name is Dr. David Jolly, he said, no, we got another guy that needs to present. And the chairman said, you won, you're good. He was like, no, he worked hard on this and he is going to present. So then they let him present, but we won. We walked out with a victory. And so it changed policy. And so that opened my eyes to say, So I'm in school for public administration. I was getting my master's in public administration. And I said, I'm in school and I've been thinking about this all wrong. There's a whole niche here with policy and health that we can take advantage of because nobody's thinking in these lines. And I've been getting jobs ever since because I'm thinking outside of the box of how to approach health, especially public health, through policy. And so I know I spent a whole lot of time on policy, and I must go to my next slide. But this is something that we need to make sure Because when I got to the next job, that's exactly what we did. We were looking at working with faith communities to change their policies, not just for smoking. We had another program that looked at their eating habits. So we changed the policies and the bylaws for these faith communities, these black churches, these black Baptist churches, no less, with the General Baptist State Convention in North Carolina that have roughly over 2,000 congregations across the state of North Carolina. But we were changing the way their kitchen committees approach. I know, right? But you had to be mindful, though, because we didn't want to get rid, okay, so this is going to sound just too black, but we didn't want to get rid of their black culture traditions, right? Fried chicken is not a black culture tradition. It's a Southern tradition. So we said, you don't have to get rid of the fried chicken. We just want you to add baked chicken as a substitute. We don't want you to get rid of your diabetes causing sweet tea, AKA diabetes in a cup. We just want you to offer water or 100% juices as a substitute. And so by starting there and not making people do a cold turkey chop, I mean, I'm looking around the room, I've seen some women have done the big chop before, right? That sometimes is the hardest step to creating change, right? So we didn't say you had to do this big chop of your food. We said we can gradually implement healthier options to change your health behaviors, right? And it worked. And then we can actually go back now and still track because they incorporated these changes into their bylaws and the way that they govern themselves to see that the fried chicken is gone. It may look like fried chicken, but it might be like shake and bake, you know. And so that was something that we understood is when you're working with people, you can't really change their environment so drastically that it will hurt them or even kill them. So, anybody ever heard of Dr. Jones? She is a phenomenal woman. She has these allegories on race and racism, right? That kind of explain things in a better light. So when we talk about racism, people get kind of scared. It's because we don't talk about it correctly. Racism is not what we think it is. Racism is not just talking about bigotry or bias or prejudice. When we talk about racism, and yes, this is connected to health. When we talk about racism, we're talking about power. We're talking about systems of power, right? And these unshared systems of power is what the issue is. So you have one group that have power over other groups that are unshared. That is racism. Now, do bigotry and bias and prejudice and discrimination play a part? Yes. But when you get to the true definition of what is racism, we're talking about power. And when power is invisible, then racism thrives. So we have to change the narrative of how we talk about racism, not so that it can be warm and fuzzy and fluffy, but getting to the root cause of what it really is. And we're talking about systemic issues, we're talking about systems that need to be changed, then we have to talk about what racism really is and how it's connected to our health. So there's also, if you've never taken a training on racism, I suggest that you do. And one of the ones you can do in North Carolina is the Racial Equity Institute. And they travel all across the country and do trainings, but they're really good. And they have this, they kind of use an analogy to talk about systems. So as health educators and health professionals, they talk about this fish theory, right? You walk by a body of water, you see a fish or two that are dead, and you walk by and you say, oh man, that's terrible. You know, it's sad that these fish have died, right? You walk on, you keep doing, what you do. But then you come back and you see that more fish have died, right? So what is it that we do? As professionals, what do we do? That's a good question. Why are they dying? But what do we do? We get the fish, right? We take them out of the water, we clean them up, and then we put them back in the water. No, I'm not saying what you should do. I'm saying what we do. There's a difference. Oh, I'm glad you said no. But that's what we do. We clean fish, right? We save fish, then we put them back in that water. The problem is it's not necessarily the fish need to be cleaned, but the water needs to be cleaned, right? Well, here's the spin on that. The water represents what? Say it. An environment is what? The systems that we live in, the systems that we work in. So there needs to be systems change in terms of what we do. Here's the other piece though. Anybody, raise your hand if you ever had like fish, like a fish tank. Right. When I was in college, I wasn't rich. I'm still not rich. So I couldn't afford fish food. So I had goldfish. And so I would give my fish pieces of bread. And my fish were like, my goldfish were huge. And people would come to my dorm room like, why are your fish so big? I said, well, one, I don't have a car, a barrier. And two, I can't afford to go get them fish food, which is crazy. Like, how did you afford the fish, right? Well, that's called a refund check. But learning from that, a lot of times we want to go in, so when we're exposed to this, we want to go in, clean the fish, clean the water, and then ride off in the sunset, right? Can't happen like that. Because if you've had a fish tank, you understand that that water gets nasty, right? It gets dirty, dingy. And so what you have to do is clean the tank. But when you clean the tank, what you do is you scoop your fish and put them in like a plastic bag or something in that water that they were in. And then when you clean the tank, you put that bag back in the new water, right? Because the fish has to get acclimated to the new environment. Because if you just throw them in the new water, what happens to them? They die of shock. So when we're changing the environment, we have to change it in a way that it's got to be less threatening and harmful for the people that live in that environment. So we have to gradually change the water or the system. It doesn't happen overnight. So Dr. Jones kind of talks about some of these systems and breaks down there's three different definitions of classes of racism that we all see in different ways of life. And so it's very good. And when you get the slides, if you get to this part right here that says Gardener's Tale, you can see a video of her doing the TED Talk on that. So make sure you check that out as well. So we're talking about addressing racism. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those are hyperlinks that lead to some type of article or video that talk about these things. So we talked about defining racism already, but you'll hear some terms that don't really work. So the term reverse racism, anybody ever heard that term? It's not a real term. It doesn't exist, right? I know you're trying to figure out, well, why doesn't it exist? Well, when we're talking about racism, as I told you, we're talking about power. Minorities don't have power in this country, right? We don't set up systems. You might see little micro environments of perceived power and influence, but on a larger scale, minorities don't wield power in this country, right? So they can't be racist. Now, don't mishear me. They can be prejudiced, they can be discriminatory, they can be bigoted, they can be biased, but not racist. And so that's one thing we need to throw off the table. You may hear the term like black people can't be racist. No, they can't. But they can be all these other things that are connected to racism, right? Black on black crime. Anybody ever heard that term before? Does not exist. I know, it rounds up a little bit, right? Black on black crime does not exist. Crime exists. It's just crime. Have you ever heard the term white on white crime? Right, because it doesn't exist. So studies have shown that you are connected to the people around you. So all these people in here, right? These are your peers, your cohorts, your family, your neighbors, right? You are prone to do acts of violence or kindness to the people that are closest to you. So if you live in an all-black neighborhood and you go kill somebody, you're gonna kill somebody probably close to you. It's crime, it's bad, it's sad, it's just crime. It's nothing to do with black on black. So, black on black crime does not exist. Crime does exist. Race versus racism. So a lot of times people want to make the problem about race. Well, one, race is a social construct that was invented by a scientist who even himself said that this has nothing to do with biologics. There's no scientific basis of race that we can really connect to. But by creating this system, a kind of a class system, you're going to remember it. So you may go and do some research and see that the Caucasoid and the Mongoloid and the Negroid, these type of classifications were created to define people, but there's no real scientific basis connected to that. We're all people, right? But don't get it confused that race is the problem, because it's not race, it's actually racism. And so you'll see people say, oh, well, this is connected to race. No, this is connected to racism. And so an example of what we're talking about is that a lot of the issues that have happened now can be connected back to what we have created as race. When we talk about the Holocaust, right? When we talk about the Holocaust, raise your hand if you've ever heard of the Holocaust. Right. So there's a whole new field of study, though, it's called epigenetics. Anybody ever heard of epigenetics? Maybe one? Okay, cool. Epigenetics looks at a few things, but the epidemiology that's connected to the science of genetics. There is a research study going on right now that's showing that survivors of the Holocaust and their offspring have altered stress hormones, right? So when we're looking at these group of people, Holocaust was between 4 and 12 years of existence, depending on where you were. There are these, I can't think of the word right now. Anyway, there's a part of the body, it starts with a C. What is it? Cortisol. Cortisol is produced in the body to help us deal with stress, right? Those things are supposed to rise and then decrease. There's an enzyme that breaks down the cortisol. So when you're experiencing trauma or starvation or things like that, it will come up. But when you have long periods of trauma that have never decreased, then your cortisol levels increase and the enzyme that breaks down the cortisol decreases. So what happens in this study, they show us that the cortisol levels of people who are survivors of the Holocaust are elevated, and it passes down to their offspring. So what, I know you're like, well, what does that mean? So when you have elevated levels of cortisol, it predisposes the offspring to have issues later on in life, like diabetes, hypertension, and other issues like that. Depression can happen. So we're looking at, this under 20-year period, we're seeing that, right? But when we look at the issues of the American Holocaust that we call slavery in this country, you've had over 200 years of people being treated a certain way, who then also will have these higher levels of cortisol that get passed down to their offspring. And then we look at the issue of what we're dealing with in this country that's being taped now around stress and brutality and all these issues, so that it seems like the trauma has never really stopped for the body. Because what happens when you go to bed at night, right? The body repairs itself, it heals itself because you're relaxed. But if you never get to a state where you can relax and you're always on, on edge, then you have these altered stress hormones. And so you'll see why you have these disparities. This is a part of the disparities that you're seeing, is because we've never dealt with the root causes of the issues. And so people are still living in trauma and still having these issues. So when you think about the work that we all do, and you want to know why is this population or these populations so, different than the other populations? Because they haven't had the opportunity or the access to really heal. And so that is part of the problem. So when we're thinking about racism and these other systems and health disparities, health inequities, and trying to get to health equity, these are some of the problems that we all face every day. And then post-racial society, I don't think I even need to say anything about that, but that's not true. We are not living in a post-racial society. So we'll talk about that later. When we're talking about what influences health equity and how to address it, these are some of the systems that we are looking at, and the frameworks, and there's so much that we could be talking about on that end. I need 3 volunteers though. All right, so we're going to get to that in just a second. So community engagement. So how does this all kind of play in together? So when we're thinking about a community engagement, we got to think about how we connect back to communities, right? Because it's one thing to have these resources to help people's health get better, but if you can't get in the door to help people understand how to utilize resources or access them, then we're doing ourselves and the community a disservice. So we talk about purposeful partnering, and that's the intentional relationship between 2 or more people or organizations with a shared common goal or interest to achieve a specific goal or aim. So sorry, I just kind of stumbled through that. The first thing we do when we go into communities is what? We listen. We can't go into a community and say, here's what you got to do. You're doing it wrong. We're better than you. Those type of things. Those cut people off. If somebody went in your office and told you how to do something differently, it's all about the presentation. It was a famous show that was on NBC in the 80s and 90s, right? Big family, and very good messages came from that show, right? I'm not going to name the show. Right. But there was a scene in one of the episodes. Well, I can name a character. There was a character by the name of Dabness Bricky, right? He came on the scene, and he just kind of fell into the laps of this family. And the father of the family said, do y'all like steak? Some people don't eat meat, but yeah. Or do y'all like people that are vegans? Do y'all like Brussels sprouts? Or anyway, whatever you like. So he said, do you like steak? He said, yeah, nice big juicy porterhouse steak. And he said, what do you want on it? He told him, everything he likes on his steak, how he likes his steak, medium rare, blah, blah, blah. And so he said, yeah, so I'm gonna put that on a garbage can lid and serve it to you, right? He said, no, I'm not gonna eat that. He said, right. He said, it's all about the presentation. So when we think about engaging communities and going into communities, we have to be mindful of how we present ourselves. When I was working nonprofit, working with these churches, we even had to be mindful of the rental car that we got. So, 10 plus years ago, the Chrysler 300s came out. Everybody wanted to, the celebrities were driving them. I don't know how Shaq got into one, but he ended up getting into one. And so we could not drive that car when we went into communities, because it seemed like the messaging the community get is like, oh, well, these people have a whole bunch of money. I'm like, no, I'm paycheck to paycheck just like everybody else. But that's usually what all the rental car companies had because everybody wanted to get them. So we had to kind of be mindful of how we presented ourselves to community. I would never go into community dressed like this. So what we did was create T-shirts and things that represented the company, but we went in there looking as much like community as we could because we wanted them to connect with us and not be distracted or more, you know, like on Fridays, I don't wear a bow tie, but I wear a bow tie almost every day, right? Because of the setting I'm in. But today, I don't have a bow tie. I would have had jeans on, like I said earlier, if I had known that we could have done it. But you see, I'm a little salty about that because I'm telling you, I'm only 37, but I've gotten to the age where I have driving shoes. Like, yes, yeah. Well, and I used to frown upon that notion, but I was like, and they're slip-in driving shoes. Like, oh, man, those things are awesome. Like, when I got to the gas station to fill up before I got here, I said, man, I gotta get out my driving shoes. Anyway, and they're stylish driving shoes at that. I mean, but they look like old Usher shoes. So anyway, so we have to listen. And then we have to have the 4 C's that you see behind me in terms of being concerned and committed. Like, you have to be authentic when you go in the community. You can't just be fake. Like, be yourself, but be a version of yourself that's non-threatening and that shows that you really care. Because the community people will smell that. They will, like sharks smelling blood in the water, they will find it and like, okay, yeah, you're not real. So find a way to be who you are, but in a sense that's not threatening to the community, right? And these are some of the processes, and you'll see this in the slides when we get them to you. And then there's different levels of engagement, right? But when we think about these levels of engagement, we want to make sure that we're operating in a realm that people are actively engaged, because there are other realms where people are not engaged or disengaged or being harmful to what we're trying to do here, right? And so even looking at Maslow's hierarchy, this has kind of been altered to look at the employee-employer relationships. But you could also use this in community as well, you know. So now we get to this reason why I have these 3 volunteers up here. So I created a concept, a theoretical concept called relationship rhythms that kind of explains how we engage in community. So my 2 young ladies on the end are going to do the rope motion. You got it? It look good? Okay. Keep going. Y'all have to keep it going this whole time. So, oh, she done took her shoes off now. So, what you're witnessing is the community rhythm. Communities have a rhythm. They have a flow to them, right? And so you notice when they started that they had to kind of get on that same wavelength, that same rhythm, right? To keep that going. And so, what's your name? Cynthia represents the person or organization or people who are trying to engage communities at some level. So in the truest sense of double dutch, and there's different ways I can explain this, but double dutch seems to be sometimes the most fun. So what does Cynthia have to do before she can jump in? Yeah, so she's got to start to rock with it, right? She's got to kind of get that rhythm down. Because if she doesn't, if she just runs in head first, what's going to happen to her? She's going to get clothesline, right? Yeah. So, and we see that, though, when organizations that are not connected to communities, they just jump in head first, right? And it hurts them. And it also can disrupt the relationship with the community. So, Miss Cynthia, let's see you get that rhythm going, right? So what Miss Cynthia is doing is trying to find her point of entry, right? She's trying to observe what she needs to observe to be able to commune in communities. She needs to be in concert with them, right? So she's learning. So when she's rocking, she's starting to understand community. She's learning who they are. They're learning who she is in some sorts too, right? So then she's finding that point of entry. And once she finds that point of entry, then what does she do? Go ahead. But she doesn't just do it, she does it when everybody's comfortable, right? Oh. So keep going. So now she's connected to the rhythm of the community. They are in a relationship. So I talk about this not only because it's important to understand, but it's important to implement. Because a young lady told me one time, well, you come in this meeting to get this guy for the community, and I've known him longer than you have. I said, that's quite possible. You're much older than me, so you probably do. I didn't say it like that. That's what I was thinking of. So y'all didn't know she was gonna get some exercise today, right? And I said, but here's the problem. I said, what's his favorite food? Exactly, she didn't know. Because she wasn't in a relationship with him, she was in a situationship with him. So she knew what she wanted. It was a parasitic type situationship too. She wanted to glean off of him everything she wanted and then not care about who he was, right? So I said, here's the problem with that. You never get into true partnership and relationship with this key person from the community because you're just trying to suck off everything you could suck off and then keep going to the next project. I said, but when you really want to have impact, you have to have a relationship with that person. And I said, by the way, his favorite food is French fries. So let's give them a hand. So breaking bread can open doors. Everybody's got to eat, right? So the only reason I knew this is because I had taken him out to eat. So she had him at this meeting all morning long, didn't feed him. I mean, you saw the normal stuff, right? Like the bagels, the coffee. I mean, yeah, but I said, oh, are you going to feed him afterwards? And she said, well, no, because, I got to go do something. I said, it's fine. I will take him to get some food. So you have to be flexible as well. So I said, let's go eat, and we can meet as we eat, right? And so we had a beautiful, beautiful lunch, a place called Yard House. If you're ever in Raleigh, in North Hills area, go to Yard House. It's the only one in the state, and it's amazing. And if you don't know what you want to eat, they have everything. They have like a deconstructed sushi as an appetizer. It's amazing. They have Nashville hot chicken, because it's not really Nashville, but it's not bad. They have burgers, and of course they had fries. So he was in heaven. But as we think about, what we just saw, the other piece that we didn't say was that you also have to learn how to jump out of that rhythm so you can get other people connected to that community rhythm, right? And then as the person who jumps out, you may have to take the rope and help maintain the rhythm of that community through your partnerships. Then you have complete buy-in. So when we think about certain things, I didn't do this earlier. We have to think about a few things. So we identified potential community partners. So we ask ourselves, who needs to be at the table, right? Have you ever done this? You ever gone into community and say, somebody's missing? Or you've gone through your whole process, and at the end of the process, people come and yell at you and say, well, how come you didn't include me into this, right? That's point 5, but yeah, we'll get there. So 2, you have to observe and research that community environment. She didn't just jump in, she kind of leaned back and forth and got that rhythm. She understood where she was. She knew who she needed to talk to. And those people are the gatekeepers. So you have to connect with the gatekeepers to find the entry points, right? Once you do that, then you build trust, but you also build capacity. Because it's not that we want the communities to always rely on us, but we want them to get to a point where they are building up their capacity and understanding and see us as a true partner where we can flow resources in and out on both sides. They can give us resources and access, and we can do the same for them. When I was at Duke, I worked at the Cancer Institute, and I was the outreach and screening patient navigation coordinator for the Duke Cancer Institute's Office of Health Equity and Disparities. We use, I know we talked about TRAC. In patient navigation, TRAC is also used as an analogy of when we are handing off patients from one navigator to another. So outreach and screening, I'm making sure people are getting screened and making sure that we're eliminating barriers that would cause them not to have access to these opportunities. Those barriers we talked about were transportation, childcare. There were even barriers that were systemic barriers, like the clinic not being open on times where people could access the clinic. And so trying to remove those barriers to care. And so that helps build the trust and capacity, but the thing that we connected back to that is that patient navigation should be a bridge or a connector from the community to health systems and resources, and health system and resources back to community. And so that's why I brought that up. And 5, which is the most important piece, which should kind of permeate throughout the whole process, is making sure that you involve and engage community partners in the entire process. So when we talk about innovative strategies, we have to talk about those things that help us do what we do. So as health professionals, we tend to have a certain message, right? And I stole this from my church. Some guy that came and spoke and said, the message hasn't really changed, right? We want people to live healthy, have optimal health and well-being. But the way that we go about that change, the way we promote it can change, right? So, social media. Anybody got social media accounts in here? That's it? Okay, how many people have social media accounts? Don't raise your hand, don't raise your hand. How many people have social media accounts that you don't want other people to know about? Blink really hard. Because there's that uncomfortable piece about social media. Like, people get offended when you don't hit the add or like button. Like, somebody will add you and want you to add them back on your Facebook, and you're like, no. We work together. Like, when I get on social media when I'm not supposed to, you might be on social media when you're not supposed to. But none of us will do that, right? None of us do that, right? Okay. So, but in terms of social media, so social media is a tool. A lot of people are down on social media because they don't, maybe one, they don't understand it, or two, they don't understand it. But social media is like a hammer, right? It's a tool. You can use a hammer to build, or you can use a hammer to destroy. A lot of things that we have are tools that it's all about who wields that tool on how it's used. So patient navigation, as we talked about, is another innovative strategy that helps address barriers. And these are just some of the barriers that we saw in implementation of patient navigation when I was at Duke. But it's very important because it helps to get the stigma off of community that you may see in certain systems of care. So this piece here, this is an interesting piece. Anita Woodley is the young lady that you see, and she was working with this group, FHI 360, to do something very innovative. So FHI 360 was in the Durham area doing focus groups for African American men. They compiled all this data, and they said, we need to find a way to disseminate this data back to the community. Which, just the thought process of that alone, I was applauding. Because I was like, oh, perfect. Because a lot of times we see the opposite. We see people come into communities, take the data, and never come back to the communities to show, what we use the data for, or if they do, sometimes it's in a manner that's not palatable to that community. And so what FHI 360 did was work with Anita Woodley to do a one-woman stage play, right? They were able to take all the information and put it into like 4 or 5 categories. What Ms. Woodley did in terms of themes, she made a character for each category that represented the men and the information they shared, and released it in a one-woman play for free in the community that they got the information from. It was amazing, and if you call up to FHI 360, they probably will also give you the DVD of that performance for free. So it was just amazing because you could see the different themes coming from each character. There was like the old head, there was the young guy, you know, it was almost like being in a black barbershop almost. It was awesome. And if you've never been in a black barbershop, it's awesome. We have fun. It's a lot of misinformation that comes out of black barbershops sometimes, or hair salons, and so sometimes you have to be the voice of reason. That's not true. No, sir, no. Tuskegee Airmen is totally different from Tuskegee the Experiment. So it is, but and even in one of the videos that talks about race versus racism, you'll hear Dr. Bill Jenkins talk about the good things that actually came out of Tuskegee before the bad things happened, right? Because the bad things happen due to something that we all are probably familiar with, is when the funding decreases, right? And those projects kind of wane off and you're trying to keep them alive because they actually work, and that's when things get defunded. So don't be surprised if you have something that's working and it's starting to get defunded, because usually people don't have the patience to let things run its course, but that's a whole nother presentation. So, connect with FHI 360 if you're interested in learning more about that. This right here, I am a part of the Southeastern Health Equity Council, which is a part of the regional health equity councils that are connected to the 10 federal regions. So our area is Region 4. We're an 8-state body. So North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky are the 8 states in our Region 4. And this is a project, I actually co-chair the Social Determinants of Health Committee. And we are working to to increase access to capital in these communities in communities in each of the 8 states, and eliminate food deserts and food swamps. Everybody know what food deserts are? Food swamps? Not so much? Okay, food swamps are more like places that you'll see a lot of fast food, liquor stores, pawn shops, check cashing places, that don't really have good grocer options. And so we're working with a group called Uplift Solutions out of Philadelphia with the Food Financing Fund to kind of make sure that we are working with these communities. And then lastly, this is probably like close to the last slide, when I was talking earlier about the Health Equity Lunch and Learn series that we do in our office, we do a monthly series that kind of highlights health equity in a different light and how it affects different people. So a couple months back, we did one on hair and health disparities. We brought people in to talk about hair from a minority perspective, men and women, and how that influences health. I mean, some people don't want to get their hair whatever when they, and it may be a barrier to working out. You're not seeing it as much with certain age groups because people are going back to a natural style in some cases, and that's not a problem anymore. I like to tell people I've been natural for like 37 years. Outside of that college experiment that I did with cornrows. I have pictures. My hair was like down here. It was beautiful, but it was still natural then. But my cousin would flat iron it before she rebraided it to get all my length, and then sometimes I would just walk around campus, okay, sidetracked. I have pictures. See me after this, I'll show you one. But so we are able to connect with different groups and organizations to kind of highlight issues around health disparities and how it looks and permeates through all the programs that we do, whether it's environmental health, whether it's women and children's, maternal and child health, tobacco, things of that nature. So there have been different topics, and that was just another innovative way that we could, promote the message of eliminating health disparities while promoting health equity. So I'll leave you with this quote. It's from Benjamin Franklin. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn. Thank you for having me. This is my information. Thank y'all so much.